Number 47 of the House of Commons Standing Committee of the Status of Women. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on October 31st of 2022, the committee will resume its study of women and girls in sport. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize your name before you are speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of the screen of either floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use your earpiece and select the desired speaking, or when you're not speaking. Desired channel, sorry. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as we best can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. In accordance with our routine motion, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meetings. Before we welcome our witnesses, I would like to provide this trigger warning. This continues to be a very difficult study. We will be discussing experiences related to abuse. This may be triggering to viewers, members, or staff with similar experiences. If you feel distressed or if you need help, please advise the clerk. I would now like to welcome our witnesses, and as an individual, we have Gretchen. And as an individual, we have Gretchen Kerr, professor. She is online. From Gymnastics Canada, we have Ian Moss, Chief Executive Officer, who we have right in front of us here in the panel. And from the Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner, what we know as OSIC, we have Sarah Eve Pelletier, Sport Integrity Commissioner. I'm going to now pass it over for the opening remarks to Gretchen Kerr. Gretchen, you will have 5 minutes. When you start seeing me winding my hand, please wrap it up within 15 seconds. Thank you very much. And I'm going to start the clock for you. Gretchen, you have the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for this opportunity to appear before your committee. The challenges that this committee is addressing are so important and have significant potential to bring about long-needed changes to the culture of sport in Canada. My remarks today are informed by a long history of engagement in sport, including as a former elite gymnast and coach. I have been researching gender-based violence and gender equity in sport for over 30 years and have applied this expertise to the development of the UCCMS, for which I was the subject matter expert. I was a contributing author to the Coaching Association of Canada's Safe Sport modules and recently published a book entitled Gender-Based Violence in Children's Sport. I have also served as a volunteer case manager for Gymnastics Canada and co-director of the National Gender Equity in Sport Research Hub. My current role is the Dean of the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education at the University of Toronto. In these brief opening remarks, I'd like to address 3 key points. 1, that the substantial body of research in the area of gender-based violence in sport confirms what athletes have been reporting. 2, that addressing gender-based violence in sport requires systemic change, including system alignment. And 3, that we must build upon what we already know, what has already been done to address gender-based violence, and identify what works, including from international examples and previous research, in order to advance the progress made thus far. I'll review each of these 3 points in greater detail. A wealth of research evidence exists that spans decades, including research conducted in Canada with Canadians. For example, in 2019, of 1,000 Canadian national team members representing over 60 sports, 23% said they experienced psychological violence on a repeated basis. 21% experienced neglect, 7% experienced sexual violence, and 3% experienced physical violence, all on a repeated basis, not one-offs. Importantly, these findings from Canada have been replicated in other westernized countries, which is important because it points to common denominators across the culture of sport and confirms athletes' accounts of their experiences. We also know from research evidence that athletes have not had access to safe, transparent, trauma-informed places to go with disclosures or reports of maltreatment. There are many reasons for this, including structural barriers, which leads to my second point. Addressing gender-based violence in sport requires systemic changes, including system alliance. It's a systemic issue and therefore needs systemic solutions. We need to go well beyond ridding the system of bad actors and police checks. We need to address everything from policies to education, complaint mechanisms, support for survivors, jurisdictional constraints, funding, and other incentives. It also means addressing the challenges presented by the multi-jurisdictional structure of sport in Canada, including resolving the gap that exists in awareness, policies, and practices between NSOs and their PT counterparts, and with those sport programs offered outside of government jurisdiction entirely. Important next steps include alignment of all jurisdictions so that athletes at every level of sport in Canada have access to safe sport and gender equity policies, education, independent complaint mechanisms, and support. Finally, it's important to build upon what we already know, and we know a lot. For example, the 2019 prevalence study of national team athletes informed the development of the UCCMS and OSIC. Similarly, the majority of the 2019 Athletes Can recommendations have been fulfilled. We are making progress. But of course, we have further to go. The recommendations from the 2018 FPT Working Group on Women and Girls in Sport and the 2019 Red Deer Declaration have not been fully implemented and thus provide important roadmaps for next steps. The introduction of OSIC is important in offering the assurances of independence that athletes need to report without fear of repercussions. But of course, OSIC will need time to gain the confidence of the sport community. And while the implementation of the UCCMS is a critical step forward, it needs to be adopted by all sport organizations at all levels in Canada.
Gretchen, I'm going to have to cut you off there. We're already over time, so you will be able to finish up some of these comments during your questions, okay? I'm now going to pass. Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Kerr. I'm now going to pass it over to Ian Moss with Gymnastics Canada. Ian, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks for inviting Gymnastics Canada to attend this meeting. I'm certainly here to answer any questions the committee members may have as truthfully and openly as I possibly can. What I'll share with you is that we are deeply committed to support and advance recommendations that will help to make sports safer, inclusive, and equitable. While the focus of this committee is on girls and women in sport, the comments I offer are focused on the importance of creating an environment and culture that will positively impact all participants. I've been working in sport since 1990 in a variety of roles. I share this because I've witnessed many attempts to modernize our fractured and outdated sports system over the last 3 decades, with limited success. In my opinion, until the system itself is modernized, we will continue to react to the emergence of new issues rather than proactively creating a solid foundation that's designed to mitigate risks related to safety, cheating, poor governance, and maltreatment. We can't have good sport without modernizing the system, and for this reason I believe that we ought to focus on modernizing the systems and structures that underpin sport. Recently there have been calls to hold another Dubin-like inquiry. It's important to note that Dubin himself articulated that it was less about dealing with doping as a singular issue, but rather to address the moral crisis affecting the health and vitality of sport. He argued that sport required society to examine the values attached to the sector. Sport is now grappling with a more insidious moral crisis that would benefit from a re-examination of the root causes that continue to give rise to unethical conduct. Unless we address the root causes, more issues will continue to surface, and the sports system, as depleted and disconnected as it is, simply cannot bear the load of increased expectations as society continues to shift. We must modernize the system. Gymnastics Canada has been one of the sports that has been at the centre of the safety in sport crisis. And as with any issue, there are multiple perspectives and complexities that far exceed my capacity to articulate today. The recently released McLaren Group Review of Gymnastics in Canada provides a detailed précis of not only the current challenges facing the gymnastics community, but also a way forward in our collective desire to foster a safe and welcoming culture. The report and ensuing recommendations help us better understand some of the current limitations, while importantly offering structural, cultural, financial, and operational considerations to effect meaningful and sustainable change. We need to start measuring what matters most to our collective community. The current sports system has not kept up with the contemporary humanistic approaches that are required to thrive in our increasingly complex environment. Once we start to measure alignment with cultural values, we will be in a better position to meet societal expectations. I commend the committee for providing sport leaders with a platform to examine the many outdated practices and approaches in sport that have contributed to unsafe environments. I believe this is a much-needed conversation in order for our system to change. While uncomfortable, it's critically important for sport to shift into the 21st century if we're to ensure a safe, welcoming, and thriving culture and environment for all participants. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll now pass it over online to Sarah Eve Peltier from the Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner. Sarah, you have 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your invitation and for your work on this important and troubling issue for the people of the sport community. Sport should be a positive, welcoming, and enriching experience for everyone involved. That experience should be about joy, about friendship, about growth. This is certainly the kind of experience I'm privileged to take away from my own participation as a former athlete. Unfortunately, as demonstrated by powerful and heartbreaking testimonies before and outside of this study, as well as by studies about the prevalence of maltreatment, it is clear that too many have experienced harm in their sport journey. Even one experience of maltreatment is too many. It simply is not what sport is all about. I have been guided by deep motivation to act as a positive agent of change for sport, with the athletes at the heart of it. This is the same motivation that has driven me to step into this role 8 months ago at such an urgent time for sport. Je vais poursuivre en français.
I will continue in French. The Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner shares the same vision as you that all participants in Canadian sport should benefit from quality, inclusive, accessible, welcoming, and safe sport experiences. We are taking strides to make sport safer by actively addressing matters while expanding our services to support those who are reaching out. We are nowhere near where we want to be, and we acknowledge that much more will be needed to accomplish this vision. As we continue to evolve with our foundational work, we have noted that sport in our country is in dire need of harmonized rules around maltreatment in sport and how to address it. The Universal Code of Conduct to Prevent and Address Maltreatment in Sport, the UCCMS, provides a strong foundation at the national level, but the current inconsistency of rules and their application at different levels of sports participation remains an important gap to be addressed. As other witnesses have stated, I believe that education and prevention is required at all levels to truly effect the sustainable cultural change that is needed. We are hearing from athletes and from others directly impacted by experiences of harm. We will continue to work diligently and relentlessly in order to strengthen our processes. We are building. We are a place where people can now go for help. And just like this committee today, we are listening. We adapt, and we do everything that we can in order to make sport safer. Thank you for listening, and thank you again for your important work.
Thank you very much. We're now going to start and lead into our rounds of questions. For the first round of questions, each party will be granted 6 minutes, and I'll ask them to wrap up. I'm going to start off with CPC and Anna Roberts. Anna, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for joining us today. As we've discussed in previous meetings, this issue has been going on for too long, and it's time to act. Enough has been said, enough witnesses have come forward, and we're sitting idle and not protecting the most innocent people in our country. So I guess I'm going to start with, is it Ian? Ian Moss? Mr. Moss? Thank you. You mentioned that, with Gymnastics Canada, that your primary job is to protect the athletes. Was I correct in hearing that? So in protecting the athletes, what I'd like to know is how much money does Gymnastics Canada receive from Sports Canada? No
problem at all. We receive essentially a core grant, like many national sport bodies do, so that has been the same for the last decade, and that's roughly $1 million a year. And we also get some what they call top-up funding through the On the Podium process, which is a combination of Sport Canada and Olympic Committee money. And that currently totals also about $1 million.
So in total, it's approximately $2 million?
Per year, yes.
So does Gymnastics Canada receive money from the registration fees collected by local clubs?
That's correct as well, yes. We get $8 per participant across the country.
Okay. In two separate media reports, as the high performance director, you were aware of allegations against Alex Brad and Scott McFarlane. Did you take any measures to suspend the coach and investigate the allegations?
It was Alex Bard, I believe, you're referring to. I am fully aware of those situations, of course, because I was central to certainly the Alex Bard matter. And as in every decision I take decisions based on facts. And as such, I made decisions related to Alex Bard's position initially and then his current suspension or termination based on the facts that I had available to me. With Scott McFarlane, with respect, that was a criminal case that we didn't have any actual involvement with because it was through the criminal process. May I clarify that in saying that obviously there was an employee before me who was involved with the Scott McFarlane case at the Ottawa Gymnastics Club, though. So I wasn't directly involved.
So help me understand something, because I was reading some information from CBC. So in 2017, a complaint about Brad was taken directly to you, and who then, months before, Brad was promoted to a head coach. Brad was allowed to resign.
I think you're referring to Bard, correct?
Bard.
Yeah, Bard.
Sorry.
Okay,
Sorry. I apologize. So he was continued to allow to coach, knowing that these allegations were made. How can we protect our young athletes when we haven't fully, for lack of a better word, punished the individuals that created these situations? Our athletes are struggling. We've heard it from many, many athletes, and it's disturbing to me as a mother and a previous, recreational athlete, that we're allowed to allow these individuals to get away with it.
Thank you for your question. It is a very difficult scenario, of course, when I'm in a position where I have to ensure that there is due process in everything we do that's based on facts. And while allegations come forward, they have to be based on factual evidence. And so when the decision ultimately was made in regard to Mr. Bard, that decision was based on factual evidence that was available to me.
Well, how many complaints were filed? Can you tell us that?
There was ultimately one complaint that was filed and action was taken, and it was not in respect to abuse and maltreatment.
And was that complaint investigated?
No, because it was a code of conduct complaint, and a decision was made in terms of a contractual matter.
Was there any other complaints referred to any other? No, none.
In respect to Mr. Bard, that is to date the only complaint I actually have on file.
And so would you say that the witness that came forward to make the complaint, was she able to articulate what her situation was in an effort for you to pursue it further?
Sorry, just to clarify then, in respect to the formal complaint that came forward that ultimately resulted in his termination of his contract, yes, that individual did not come to me, but came through a board member, and the decision was made collectively to terminate him based on that.
So he is not allowed to coach anymore, is that correct?
No, that's not correct. It was a contractual matter that was dealt with, and this was not an abuse and maltreatment issue. This was a code of conduct issue.
So I don't understand that. So we have a complaint against this individual, and an investigation is not necessary because it was a code of conduct. Can you explain what that means? Because I'm totally confused.
No, that's fair. I totally do understand the confusion. Obviously, our system is based on a whole series of policies and procedures. We have to follow those policies and procedures based on that requirement.
So human
Anna?
factors. What?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
Anna,
okay.
your minutes are up. I'll get back to you. I'm going to pass it over now to Jenna Suds for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here with us today. I'd like to start my questions with Ms. Pelletier. We heard in your testimony, your ambition with OSEC, obviously, and the mandate that you have, but also the sentiment that much more is needed in order to ensure that we are protecting athletes. And I'm wondering if you can speak to the limits of the powers that you have currently, and perhaps even what additional powers you feel that you could use in order to fulfill your vision and mandate.
Thank you very much for your question. So if I may start with limitations, I think the first thing I'd like to acknowledge is that we have the ability to receive today and look into matters that relate to maltreatment and discrimination. And whenever we have the ability to look into those matters, we do. And when we don't, we're trying to provide the best help and empower those who came forward with the means and the tools for them to have options and know what types of resources they can access. What we realize as of today is that when cases come to us, sometimes those cases are inadmissible. And when we're looking for ways where we can redirect those inadmissible cases, in less than a third of those cases, we're able to find an alternative mechanism. So what I'm referring to here are what I would call the current gaps in our system at the different levels of participation. Our mandate with the OSEC sits primarily at the national level, but we know that coaches, athletes, participants experience sport at all levels of the system, at the local level, at the provincial level. So that is one limitation, but I would call it a systemic limitation to our existing mandate, but it is something that can be solved collectively if at all levels of the system work jointly together. In terms of our powers, we do have powers that are effective. We can impose sanctions against individuals who have committed violation. We have the power to compel participation by those who have signed on to our processes. And we also have the mandate to maintain a registry of sanctions. So those are three things that we feel are very necessary in order to have an effective mechanism that will truly serve its purpose. But the way that our jurisdiction and our mandate is currently construed, there are some limitations to those three aspects that I mentioned. So I would be happy to provide you further details on those, each of those, if that's of interest.
Excellent. Yeah, I want to make sure I understood. So one of the things I think I just heard you say was that, one of your limitations being around the admissibility of cases if they are not at the national level. Am I understanding that correctly? So if someone comes forward with an instance that is under the jurisdiction of a province or a territory at the local level, you currently don't have the tools to address those situations. Is that correct?
I would say that the tools to address those situations are inconsistent for time being, because they would rely on whether there is an existing solution in place, let's say at those provincial or territorial level. And what I want to speak to is the gaps and the inconsistency in how that is happening currently at the provincial, territorial, or simply local club. In some instances, let's say in the province of Quebec, there is a system in place. So if, based on the circumstances, there is an ability to inform the person who came forward of that option and to help as much as possible alleviate the burden of having to navigate yet another system, this is something we'll do. But the weaknesses or the gap that I'm flagging is that currently those systems are not in place everywhere. So there are instances where if someone comes to us for addressing their matter and we're not able to address their matter, it could be that there is no alternative forum where we can provide that option to them, essentially.
Okay, excellent. So I think then, if I'm understanding you correctly, and please clarify, you used Quebec as an example. So Quebec would have a office similar to OSEC in place to address issues at the provincial level, whereas currently other provinces or territories in Canada do not. Is that correct?
Yes. So in terms of the inconsistency that we face is that Quebec may have a set of rules and may have a system to address the breach of conduct for those rules. And that both in terms of having harmonized rules that apply to all participants and having an effective system to respond to potential issues, those are gaps that we currently see.
Okay. And is there a mechanism or a will for provinces or territories to sign on or to participate with OSEC as national organizations have?
So the services of the OSEC are also available for provincials and territories to join if that corresponds to their needs. It is, of course, our office can offer those services to the designated provinces and territory, or we can also work in collaboration with an alternative mechanism if that is the preferred option.
We're now going to turn the floor over to Adrienne LaRoche. You have 6 minutes.
Merci. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being with us today for this very important study. I get the impression that the deeper that we dig, the more we find very disturbing facts. I'll address my first question with Ms. Pelletier. In your opening remarks, you talked about the office being inclusive and accessible and it is not currently open and accessible. And I find that the government's response to the independent inquiry that is being requested is not normal. It's not normal to not be giving more space to athletes. We saw in the media that we're only looking at the tip of the iceberg. And your office receives 2/3 of complaints. And Canadians would support an inquiry. And there was a researcher who said that for over 10 years, they have been studied these issues. And they received, and at another committee this summer, we heard from researchers about this topic. I hope that the call for a public independent inquiry in order to shed a light on maltreatment will be approved, because the Canadian Centre of Ethics is also making a request for this independent inquiry. Now to the heart of my question. This inquiry is necessary because things are not going well in sports in Canada right now. I believe that you raised a lot of essential points, and they highlight the fact that there is a lot of work that needs to be done. We're at a turning point in sports. Our office and for the past 8 months has been focusing on moving forward and being there for those who come to us. And when they come to us, we want to be able to support them, give them information, and help them, even if we don't have that responsibility. But we want a system that has no gaps, so that if anyone raises a concern, they have somewhere to turn, somewhere to go. But our main goal is to support people and to offer them resources inside our program or outside our program. But you yourself talked about all the obstacles and the limits that your office has in responding to complaints by victims. The minister, in October 2022, after a caucus meeting, stated that you had a mandate to have an independent inquiry into sports. Sports Canada has not responded. Is this inquiry moving forward? Because the minister stated that you were given that mandate. And can you share with the committee the fruit of your labor? Can you share your mandate, who you've heard? Will you be consulting the public? And will you be responding to the call from the minister made in October? Answer. What I can currently say is that you mentioned the limits of our abilities, and in the few months that we've been operating, we've noticed opportunities to make our processes better. I would like to clarify that we do have some very effective powers, and it allows us to examine files and to impose sanctions against individuals who breach the rules. So these are powers that we have. Is the system perfect? No, because it is currently being worked on, and there are opportunities to make it better. You made reference to our investigative powers. It is a part of our office's mandate. It allows us to investigate on actions committed by individuals, but we also know that in certain environments the issue is systemic, not only in certain individual actions. So in those cases, we can do an investigation of those sports environments, and when they are concluded, recommendations are given. Our office will also ensure the follow-up of the implementation of those recommendations. I'm going to have to cut you off because my time is almost up. You don't seem to have all the resources that you need.
So much. We will be sure to get back to Adrian on her next round, but I'm now going to pass it over to Leah Gazan for 6 minutes. You have the floor, Leah.
Thank you so much. My first questions are for Dr. Kier. I've just started this study, very new to me. I've never kind of followed organized sports, although I do know particularly in gymnastics, there has been a long and violent history of abuse of little kids. Now, I have a question for you. Do you agree, yes or no, with a national judicial review or inquiry in regards to what's currently happening in sports?
Mm-hmm. I believe that our time and resources are better spent in other ways. The calls
I
for
have
judicial
limited time. I asked you that because you submitted a brief to the Standing Committee on the Status of Women December 2022, and you said, in your opinion, there were avenues available for redress other than opting into a judicial inquiry, and you're sharing that, to investigate maltreatment in Canadian sport. But then the former minister for sport came out in the media last week saying the exact opposite, and I'll quote Kirsty Duncan, who was the former minister of sport. She said, in quotes, "It should not be a fight. I'm asking for the protection of athletes and children. There should never have been pushback, Duncan told CBC in an exclusive interview. She goes on to state in quotes, "I will not stand idly by while there are athletes, children, and young people hurting in this country, and I do not accept the status quo. And if we do not push for an inquiry, it means accepting the status quo, and I will not be complicit." That came from the former minister. I'm wondering, I mean, that's clear. I mean, she would have really kind of known what was going on as the minister. Do you agree that there is some truth to what she's saying, that because of the rampant amounts of abuse, that this doesn't call for a national inquiry in light of all the allegations and confirmed cases of abuse coming out in sport?
Well, I and others would argue that we cannot allow the status quo to continue, but I would also argue that there are better paths forward than a judicial inquiry, that the judicial inquiry will give us information we already have in terms of prevalence, effects, causes, and so on. It will detract from the progress that we're making thus far. We have the information we need to implement change.
Sorry, just because I have
changes.
limited time and you've already submitted a report, I'd like to ask you a couple of other questions. Do you act as an advisory capacity for other sport organizations such as COC and Athletes Can, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Is the president of Athletes Can, Aaron Wilson, your PhD student?
Yes. Was
Ellen McPherson, former Safe Sport Director for Jim Can, also your PhD student?
Yes.
Okay. Over the past 30 years, you've had a lot of PhD students. I'm a former academic. I know much of academia is getting research grants. Currently, in terms of research grants and funding, are you currently receiving $1.65 million of funding from Sport Canada between 2020 and 2022?
That contract for the National Research Hub on Gender Equity has ended.
Okay, but did you receive between 2020 and 2022 $1.65 million?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
The center did.
So if there was a national inquiry or judiciary inquiry, could that potentially, if something happened, let's say, and I'm not saying this is your motive, but let's say it impacted the funding to Sport Canada, could that potentially indirectly your ability to receive grants from Sports Canada if that organization would become under jeopardy?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And I'd be happy to elaborate on my rationale for that response.
You know what? And please do. You're more than welcome to submit briefs to the committee. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time here. My next questions are for Ian Moss around Mr. What was his name? Alex Bard. Okay. Were you aware of indiscretions by Alex Bard prior to the complaints coming forward?
I was aware of concerns of some of his behavior, and we dealt with those concerns.
Okay, so I just want clarification. You spoke about how Alex Bard was dismissed but was able to resign because of breaches to the code of conduct. What breaches were those?
There's an element of confidentiality, I would suggest, in some of this, and I don't know whether I'm allowed to breach that or not. But this is it was certainly a code of conduct issue in regards to one incident that occurred at a social event, and as such, it was dealt with like it would in any other code of conduct with any other individual.
No, fair enough.
Okay, your time is up. And just to explain to us, we're sort of like, you can bring everything to us. That's not a problem. We do take all things, non-disclosure agreements, all of those things have no impact on our committee. Thanks so much. I'm going to now pass it over to Warren Steinley, and I believe him and Anna may be working out some times, but one of you guys figured us out. So Warren Steinley or Anna Roberts, take the floor. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to be here with the committee. And it reminds me a lot of a conversation that happened when I was younger. I grew up in Saskatchewan in Swift Current, and that was where the Graham James coaching incidents happened, where a lot of young men were sexually abused by their head coach. And there was a lot of talk around changes happening in sports all over this country. And I feel like it's deja vu, and these same conversations are still being taken and being had about young people and the safety of young people in sports. I'm a huge fan of sports. I think it's great for young people to get involved, but there's always this segment of the population that gets into coaching for the wrong reasons. And I think we really need to take our time, because I don't want this conversation to happen again in 20 years when my daughter, perhaps something happens, or another young girl in gymnastics. So one of my first questions would be, in the McLaren report, it actually states that, reference multiple sports in your recent report, we saw a situation with women's soccer where a coach with serious allegations in Ontario began to coach in British Columbia. Do you believe there needs to be a national registry to ensure perpetrators no longer coach or are part of the association? I would be asking Sarah that. Do you feel that that is something that should fall under the OSIC office?
Thank you. And first, I just want to share the preoccupation that certainly from an OSIC standpoint, we do not want to see history repeating itself. In terms of what you're referring to is a sanctions registry, a national registry of individuals who are under sanctions, we definitely share that objective that you mentioned. We firmly believe that in order to make sure that individuals who are under sanctions do not have the ability to navigate the systems or try to find gaps in the system, then we firmly believe that for that we do need a registry of sanctions that is publicly accessible. Currently, our office, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just got a couple more questions, but thank you very much for that.
Yes.
I believe there should be a national registry, and I think you're on the same page as that. You said in one of the briefs you've had 24 complaints at your office already, and 16 are in limbo because the sports authority in that province or the national sport authority or governing body hasn't signed on to your office. The minister's made a timeline of April for these sports bodies to sign and so you'd be able to investigate further these complaints. Why April? Why so long? I think it should be done now. Do you think timing's of the essence? I think we should make sure that these bodies sign on, or their funding should be looked at, because it's important to protect these our kids. And I'd like to have your comments on that. And do you think the timelines are suitable, or should we speed this up so we can make sure we get rid of the bad coaches and the good coaches have the opportunity to do their jobs?
Thank you for your comment. And I would agree that time is of the essence, and the earlier sport organizations will have joined the program at the national level, the more our ability will be to address cases that relate to participants under their jurisdiction. And to your point, we have received all the way up till December 31st, a total of 48 complaints. And as of so far in 2023, we have had yet another increase in number of organizations joining the program. And we can see a positive effect of that already on our admissibility and the number of complaints that we're able to look into.
Would you be able to break down those complaints by sport?
Yes, we are. We do maintain statistics by sport and by other types of measurements, by type of maltreatment or discrimination or the type of behaviors that's being alleged. Are you asking if I can refer those numbers? Oh, unfortunately, this would compromise the confidentiality of any specific matters. We will be reporting some further details on an annual basis, but again, those who come forward, the victims, the survivors, sometimes in very small sport environments, in order to protect their confidentiality of the victims and survivors.
I'd just like to sorry, I got 20 seconds left. If you can,
yes.
all the information that you could bring to us about the sports and the breakdown, it would help with our committee work for sure. I don't want to break any confidentiality agreements, but I don't think it's a problem for our committee because I think we are, as the chair might interject, I think we would be able to have that information. And I always find confidentiality is what really protects these people that are actually doing damage to children. And I don't frankly think they should be able to just hide behind confidentiality because it's the kids that need to have their say and be respected more so than these people are committing the abuses against the kids.
Thanks so much, Warren. I'm now going to pass it over for 5 minutes to Sonia Sidhu. Sonia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your very important testimony. My first question is to Madam Pallet. We have heard from the importance of independence during the study registry for database for individual sanction. My colleague already mentioned that. So the database of individual sanctions for maltreatment should be developed. What are our thoughts on this recommendation for a registry? Can you clarify on that?
Yes. So already, of course, we again support and we strongly believe that a national registry of individuals under sanctions is needed, and that needs to be a registry that is publicly searchable. As of today, our office has the mandate and does maintain a sanctions registry. That said, there are current challenges in terms of making this the information of this registry publicly available because of the current privacy legislations across the various jurisdictions. But again, this is definitely something that we're actively working on. We may need some help to make it happen, but this is definitely something that is part of the objectives of the UCCMS and the objectives of the Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner.
Thank you. My next question is, can you explain the steps of the OSIX complaint intake process? How are the athletes are supported through this process, if you can explain step by step?
Thank you for your question. Athletes, survivors, people who come forward can access both legal aid as well as mental health referral before, during, and after they go through the complaint management process. The entry point to the complaint management process is often the Canadian Sport Helpline, and this is a dedicated helpline meant to accompany and provide information to those who are simply needing to know where to go if the OSIC is an avenue for them. So there is support in place. I want to say this is definitely something that we're looking to expand, to improve, so that we can truly accompany the individuals who come to us and ask for help.
How the investigations are held for the trauma-informed individuals?
Yes, so trauma-informed care is essential into everything that we do. It starts from the moment we engage with individuals and at any point in time. In terms of our investigations, they are performed by independent professionals. They bring experience from human rights, sexual violence, dealing with children and minor, and some of which have experience in sports, some not, but all of them have both experience and specific training to ensure trauma-informed care in everything that they do.
Thank you. And I'm wondering if you can expand on why 2/3 of the cases referred to OSIC are inadmissible.
Thank you for your question. There are different reasons. The first reasons could be because the matter that was submitted to us doesn't relate to maltreatment, discrimination, or another behavior under the UCCMS, which is our jurisdiction. The second reason could be because the organization that's impacted is not a signatory of our program. That said, as we've discussed in a previous question, we're seeing less and less of these occur because the number of organizations joining has significantly increased. The last reason is the one that refers to some existing gaps. But for example, if an organization has joined, but the participant that is impacted by the allegation is a coach in a local club, it may not mean that today this coach is under the authority and the jurisdiction of the national organization, and as such, they may not fall under our jurisdiction. But as I said, even if that's the case, we're going to try to find ways that we can help provide resources to our program or otherwise for the people who came forward with their issue.
I'll pass.
Thanks so much. We're now going to pass it on. We're into 2.5 minutes. So to Adrienne, you have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have a question for you, Mr. Moss. I don't have a lot of time. I understand a bit more why you're against the independent inquiry. You weren't even able to get at the heart of things against Mr. Bart, who was accused of sexual assault. And it doesn't look very good if a lawyer is defending your organization and a coach that has been accused. Please understand, Mr. Moss, that we're not talking about independence and impartiality. And imagine the perception if you are questioning victims about whether or not their complaints are receivable. Is that not intimidating?
Gymnastics Canada is in support of a judicial inquiry. We never have not been in support of it. We've been in a situation where we've had to take action very quickly because there was no other opportunity for others to be engaged, and that's what we've done. So from that point of view, we fully support the role of a judicial inquiry into the overall review of our sports system. Mr. Bard, to date, has not been, to my knowledge, accused of any sexual assault or any allegations of that nature.
Alors, est-ce que vous avez vous-même...
Are there any cases against you by a member of staff and during your mandate as director? And if so, how many?
To my knowledge, there are no cases.
Comprenez, Monsieur Moss. Et une autre question.
Another question. At the Olympics in Tokyo, was the coach in the presence of minors?
Sorry, which coach are you referring to?
Le Monsieur Bard,
Mr. Bard, the one who went to Tokyo, even though there were complaints against him. Was he in the presence of minors?
Bard was not at the Tokyo Olympics.
Monsieur Moss, mon malaise vraiment.
Mr. Moss, what disappoints me the most is seeing the impression that's given that we don't want to get to the heart of things, that you spent more time trying to camouflage or to protect the image of Gymnastics Canada instead of protecting the victims. Mr. Moss, that's the image that people get.
We're now going to go to 2.5 minutes for Leah. Leah, you got the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'll go back to you, Mr. Moss, and I'm very happy that you do support a judicial inquiry because the more I hear, the more I think it's necessary. Going back to Mr. Bard, deeply troubling to me. You said, I mean, I understand that you can't maybe disclose what he violated, but you said in a TSN article on August 15th, 2022, in quotes, "This decision is a result of both formal and informal complaints that I have received over the past 2 weeks in respect to Alex's behavior in his official capacity with Gymnastics Canada. The nature of these complaints is consistent with the issues that we have discussed with Alex in the past. And so it was over 2 weeks before, obviously. It appears our efforts to caution and educate him have not worked. So what that tells me, he's not able to be educated on appropriate and inappropriate behavior, reminding that we are talking about working very often with people who are underage. Because of that, I would find that deeply troubling. Did you initiate a safe sport investigation in light of that information, yes or no?
I did not, and I believe you're referring to a confidential email that I provided to the board based on due process that accountability that I'm required to follow.
You said you identified that there was a pattern of behavior, couldn't educate. So why, with that knowledge, knowing that he would be able to continue coaching, because you said he can continue to coach, why would you not feel it necessary to conduct a safe sport investigation of a coach that has demonstrated a pattern of troubling behavior without any sort of rectifying of that behavior?
Beyond a code of conduct complaint, there was not any formal complaint in place in regards to his behavior. He is a coach who has a great level of technical expertise, but has not necessarily adjusted to some of the behavioral.
So technical expertise, but maybe not social expertise. Would you agree with that? Yes or no?
At some point, it came to a point where we felt that it was not appropriate to continue on in his contractual role.
Okay.
Thank you so much. We actually have 6 minutes left. 3 minutes going to Anna, 3 minutes to Mark Saray. Anna, you got the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to address my question to Mr. Moss again. I'm going to read something for you, and then I'm going to ask a question. CBC has learned the current CEO of Gymnastic Canada once promoted a coach to one of the highest positions in the organization, despite having received complaints alleging inappropriate behavior. CEO of Gymnastics Canada, Ian Moss, allegedly knew of concerns about well-known and well-respected coach Alex Brad, I don't know, before he named him to run the country's women's gymnastics program. Alex was one of Canada's most respected and well-known gymnastics coach, but several people say the former national team coach was also known for inappropriate actions that included behavior abusive towards female coaches and kissing, touching, and stroking fears in young gymnasts. So my question to you, Mr. Moss, do you have any children? And if this had happened and one of your children came to you and explained this, what actions would you have taken?
I would have moved forward with a formal complaint.
So why wasn't that done? Are you telling me that these gymnasts were not telling the truth? You're making them sound like they're making up stories. That's not the case. The case is there were several allegations, not one, not two, several.
There were several allegations. That's the point.
But earlier you said that it was, a misdemeanor, for example. It wasn't a huge thing, but now we hear differently.
No.
So I don't know what the truth is. Can you help me understand that?
Yeah, absolutely. I said earlier at the front end that we have a process based on policies and procedures and a fair and equitable process for everybody that's underneath those policies. And as such, we deal with complaints as they come forward. And ultimately, that's
obviously this complaint was neglected because these athletes were not taken seriously. In my point of view, I think that we failed them. You're the CEO, and you failed these young athletes. I don't know, as a parent, how I could possibly allow this man to continue coaching and jeopardizing our youth. I just don't understand it.
With respect, we have to do due diligence in terms of facts. It's as simple as that.
But the facts are clear.
No, they're not.
And how would you say they're not?
Allegations are not facts.
But you said earlier when I questioned you that it was really nothing to investigate. But these
No, I didn't say
allegations
that.
are serious.
No, I did not say that, actually.
Okay? Correct me, please. I apologize.
Yes. I had said that we dealt with the matter when a formal complaint came forward in regards to a code of conduct. The other matters that were concerns about behavior, we also dealt with in terms of trying to ensure that there was behavioral adjustment.
Well, obviously, this one was
Thanks so
lost.
much. We're going to now pass it over to Mark Ray for the final questions, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. My first question to Dr. Kerr, the federal funding that you received, you didn't get a chance to answer earlier because you were interrupted several times, but the federal funding you received for athletes mistreatment and gender equity research, can you explain a bit of that research, and why does that tie into your comment about not needing a national inquiry? So I just wanted to give you the chance to answer that question, please.
Mm-hmm. So the funding for the National Gender Equity Hub was not to fund research on gender-based violence. It was to bring the collective of researchers who study gender equity from various disciplines across the country together so we had a consolidated database that we could share broadly. So it really was separate and distinct from what we're talking about here today. The issue around the jurisdiction or the judicial inquiry is more about what the purpose of that is. If it's to understand the nature of the issues and the problems, we have that information. In fact, we have repeated history because we're having the same discussions we had in 1996 when we had a crisis with the Graham James case. If the purpose is to provide athletes with a voice to tell their stories and seek justice, I would propose that there are far more effective, trauma-informed ways to do that. And that's the rationale for, yes, we need to move ahead, but I believe there are better ways and more effective ways than going backwards to do a judicial inquiry.
Thank you. Ma deuxième question, c'est pour Madame.
My second question is for Ms. Pelletier. Earlier, we asked you a question about the national inquiry, but you stated that 2/3 of cases are inadmissible. Can you describe the numbers from Quebec? If there's a national inquiry, what would your role be compared to the provincial competencies? What would be the number of cases that you wouldn't be able to follow up on? Thank you for the question. For inadmissible files, as I mentioned earlier, there's only 1/3 of those files where we'd be able to identify an alternative mechanism, whether it be in Quebec or a mechanism in another national sport organization that had implemented an independent complaint review process that would be distinct from the office. So it's a small number of cases, and that's based on our first 6 months of operation. So only 1/3 of inadmissible files that we could redirect to an existing system.
Before we end this panel, there's going to be a few documents that I would like to request, and I know that there had been some requests to the Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner. It was noted looking at those 24 cases, what's admissible, what's not admissible. If we could get information and breakdown on those 24 cases as parliamentary, if you could send it to our clerk, she'll be able to review it, and we can discuss that, but if we can get that list. I would ask from Gymnastics Canada all of the emails, letters, and minutes of board minutes regarding Mr. McFarland and Mr. Bard. We would like to see all of those, all confidential. Please send it in directly to this so that we can be ensuring that we're actually getting both sides of the story. We would really like to see those documents as well. And to Gretchen Kerr, thank you so much for coming. You had noted that there was other ways of moving forward. Perhaps you can provide us other ways of moving forward in a brief. That'd be great. Thanks so much. On behalf of the group, I would really like to thank thank you all for coming today, and we're going to take a brief, probably about a minute to switch up. So we'll adjourn for 1 minute. reconvening, and we have a point of order coming, so go ahead, Adrienne.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to say to the committee, I'll take a few seconds to say that we just asked questions to Mr. Moss, and he just verbally assaulted Miss Kim Short as he left this committee.
Okay, so thank you very, very much for bringing that forward. What is normal protocol? In one moment, please. I'm going to do is I'm going to provide some opening, Sonia, during the opening comments, can you take the chair for the first few minutes here? And I will kind of look around this. Sonia, if you could take the chair. What we're going to do is I'll manipulate while good old Sonia is going to walk the chair. And I would like to welcome our three guests, Donna Gull, Sophie Gagnon, and McLaren Global Sports Solutions. You all have 5 minutes. And Donna, if you want to start with your opening 5 minutes. There you go. There's your clicker.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm here today as a storyteller, a filmmaker, a scholar, and an educator with a commitment to and track record of exploring issues in and telling stories about women and girls in sport in Canada. My core recommendation today is that we need more stories to be told about women and girls in sport to make sport better, more equitable, and safer for women and girls. These include the stories of abuse and hardship that have been told with such grace and generosity by some of the witnesses before this committee. Sharing stories is shining a light into dark places where rot has grown. Light and attention is what is needed to get rid of the rot. I believe these stories have the power to change sport, but we also need stories to show us what sport can be for women and girls in Canada. In my doctoral research examining the audience for professional women's hockey, I heard again and again how often the stories about women in sport are the stories of the problems of women in sport. If this is the only narrative we hear, the performative risk is that the repeated association between women, sport, and problem becomes normalized and naturalized. We need stories showing sport as a site of empowerment for female athletes at every skill level. Stories about the now and the future, fully inclusive stories, as well as stories about the long history of women and girls in sport in Canada. Consider the ubiquitous Heritage Minute. Of the 97 videos produced telling stories about Canadian history, 12 of them tell stories of sport. Of those 12, only one is about female athletes, the basketball team, the Edmonton Grads. Heritage Minutes exist because of the significant public funding, but why then are they not fully representative of the Canadian public? I have 3 recommendations to make to the committee to support more opportunities for storytelling on multiple media platforms. The first is about funding for media coverage of women's sports. The systemic and persistent lack of media coverage contributes to the perception that women and girls in sport are less worthy of an audience's attention, literally less valuable in terms of ratings. It perpetuates the idea that women and girls have no legitimate role in sport and puts the safety of female athletes at risk. I recommend special funding from Canadian Heritage dedicated to media coverage of women's sports. To be clear, this does not mean broadcasting the occasional midday game, but instead investing in women's sport broadcasts in prime time with high production values and significant audience development. We saw this strategy work with women's soccer in 2015 and 2019. It is worth noting that the CBC spent decades investing in men's sport, constructing the audience for sport to be the audience for men's sport. The public broadcaster should be compelled to make equal investment in the broadcast of women's sport. The second recommendation I have is about funding for scripted and factual media content. Meaningful media coverage demands more than covering games. races, and matches of occasional elite competitions. I recommend specialized funding from Heritage Canada to support the creation of factual and scripted stories of women and girls in sport for broadcast television, streaming platforms, and other digital media platforms. I note the impact of the Netflix documentary series Formula One, Drive to Survive, and how it increased public knowledge, appreciation, and viewership for that sport. At the very least, I would like to see more heritage minutes dedicated to historical Canadian female athletes such as Bobby Rosenfeld or the Indigenous women's softball team from Six Nations, Ontario. And the Indigenous women's softball. There's no or there. The third recommendation is about athletes telling their own stories. Athletes are too often silenced. I recommend the creation of digital storytelling funding for sporting organizations to provide the tools and platforms to teams of all levels that will allow girls and women to share firsthand stories of their experiences in sport. Imagine a YouTube channel dedicated to showing Canadian female athletes from all over the country sharing their experiences, their training, their competitions, their triumphs, their hardships, their camaraderie. To conclude, the stories we tell help to shape the world we live in. Stories about sport in particular work to construct our mythologies and our ideas about culture, value, and gender. We need to tell stories that shine a light on the abuse suffered by many women and girls in sport. And we need stories that celebrate sport as a space that can empower, strengthen, and support women and girls to make not only sport better and safer, but all of society. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
We're now going to move over for the next 5 minutes, and we're going to go to Sophie Gagnon from Jerry Pop. Sophie, who's online, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone. I will be doing my presentation in French.
Donc, je viens.
I'm here as a spokesperson and director for Jury Pop. It is a non-profit organization that was founded in 2009, and we want to improve access to legal services in Quebec. Our services are offered throughout Quebec, and we have a team of 35 people based in Montreal. We were asked to come here today because of our expertise on legal assistance for people who are victims of gender-based violence. For over 5 years, Jury Pop has supported victims of different forms of violence and harassment. We help them to understand their rights and to support them, whether it be during an internal investigation, when they send in their report to the police, or for civil damages. Our expertise helps people understand their rights, and it helps them trust the process. And we want them to have justice. I will be sharing to you observations from our work with victims and survivors without having an expertise in sports. We do work in different fields where there's a lot of similarities, where there are power imbalances, or where there's a prevalence of sexual violence, as in the case in sports. I would like to share with you the parameters of ideal internal justice. So that would be a process to find the truth and have sanctions and reparations. This process would be implemented by an organization where there was a case of violence. I will share with you factors that will help victims and help them feel heard and help them trust their organization. I will be quick so that we can move on to questions. Firstly, something that is essential for victims is to ensure the confidentiality of a complaint. And we could not say this enough. People want their complaints to remain confidential, and we realize that is not always possible. There are cases where organizations try to maintain the confidentiality but are not able to do so. So our recommendation is that if an investigation cannot be anonymous, then the victim should be made aware of that. There also needs to be a quality internal investigation that should be led by an independent and impartial group. The mechanisms would be launched by an organization, but they might not be trusted by the victim because of real or perceived conflict of interest. And that is why it is so important to use an independent organization. The process also needs to be fast. Often these internal processes take months. If an organization wants an internal investigation, then they need to prioritize it and give it the resources needed in order to do this investigation quickly, or else the impact for the complainant will be negative. It is also important to support the victim or the complainant on two levels. Firstly, that person needs to be offered psychosocial supports, and secondly, they need to receive legal support. That is what we offer at Jury Pub. We support people who are sending in a complaint against the employer, and we don't want to, and rather we want to support the person to explain the investigation process. We want to ensure that this person is able to understand their rights throughout the process. Next element is the communication of the findings of the investigation. Often a report will be confidential in order to protect the witness, but the conclusions, the findings need to be shared and explained to the complainant. If not, we will be breaking trust.
Over your time here, so what we'll do is during those questions you can add additional comments to that if that's okay. So we've gone a little bit over. It's just hard to get your attention online. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're now going to pass it over to Richard McLaren. Richard, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just at the outset, I want to say I'm not receiving any translation. Is there translation?
Let's just check.
French.
Thank you so much. Perhaps, have you checked on your, is there a translation button showing up on the very bottom of your screen? Sometimes there'll be something that says interpretation. Do you see that interpretation there? And it gives you the chance, the option for.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so make sure that's on English rather than floor. Do you see that there?
Yes, I did. I put it on English.
Okay, well then I have no more exciting. I'm going to throw this over to IT. They're much smarter than I am, sir. Perhaps, should we try some things in English? Yeah, he has it on English. Mark, could we try some French?
Bonjour, Richard.
Hello, Richard. Are you hearing interpretation? Thank you for being a witness here today. Are you hearing English interpretation? Is everything working for you?
Everything is working for me.
Okay,
thank you.
Fantastic. Great. Okay, so Richard, we're going to start your 5 minutes right now. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for asking me to report on the work that I've done with Gymnastics Canada. Just briefly about myself, I'm a professor emeritus at Western University Law Faculty. I've been working in various high-profile reviews and investigations in sport and sport integrity for a number of years, and best known perhaps for the investigations I did for the World Anti-Doping Agency about the Russian state-sponsored doping problems connected with the Sochi Winter Olympics. I have a group of people who work with me who constitute a highly specialized team, and we do considerable amount of investigative work, but we also do a number of other activities and reviews, and have done a lot of work for a number of different sports organizations. What we do is focus on, at MGSS, the mitigating risks related to ethics and governance within organizations. Our mission is to help sports organizations protect and enhance their brand, navigate difficult organizational issues, protect and enhance enhancing their brands, deal with issues related to ethics, governance, and integrity, and inform strategic business decisions. That's just a very quick background of myself and McLaren Global Sports Solutions, Inc. Let me turn to the gymnastics project that we did for GymCan and reported on last week. There are two parts to that project. One was to assist the sport to develop a framework or roadmap for how a cultural review should be conducted by GymCan for the benefit of the gymnastics community. That was the largest part of the project. And the other part was to look at their safe sport policies in place and determine that they met international standards and recommend any changes that would be required. The methodology of our work involved research into over 1,000 members of the Canadian gymnastics community. We did 58 personal interviews and conducted 2 surveys. One survey involved input from the provincial and territorial gymnastics organizations, and the other survey was an open access public survey of the gymnastics community in Canada. There were 974 individuals responded to in our research surveys, and almost 500 of them were gymnasts. Let me turn to the highlights of the report. The gymnastics community demands change and strongly supports a rigorous, independent cultural review to be undertaken. The research team wanted to know the extent of the appetite which the gymnastics community had for a cultural review. Was it necessary? If so, what should it entail? More than 1,000 voices representing the gymnastics community in Canada provided feedback. Most of the gymnasts in the sport reported positive experiences. However, toxic examples of abuse and maltreatment persist at all levels of coaches, judges, staff who have also reported maltreatment. Themes or areas of concern were identified through the survey and interview work to establish the foundation for the future work on a cultural shift of gymnastics. It should be noted that most gymnasts interviewed and surveyed reported positive experiences. Nevertheless, there are examples of abuse and maltreatment at all levels of the sport. The cultural review should be led by an independent interdisciplinary team and take a human rights-based approach, included as a key feature of the proposed cultural review framework. I would welcome questions about what we've done and anything else which the committee would wish to ask of me, and hopefully I will be able to respond to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. McLaren. And now working on the fly, because we do have a little bit of committee business here, I'm just going to start messing a little bit with times, if that's okay. So I was... sorry. So I was going to go 4 minutes, 4 minutes, 4 minutes, 4 minutes, which brings us up to 16, and then we'll go 3, 3, 1, and 1, if that's okay, and that will fill in all of our time. Okay, so we'll start over on this side with Mr. Waugh. Kevin, you have the floor for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome guests. I'll start with you, Mr. McLaren. Thank you for your comprehensive report, your 46 recommendations. You know, part of the problem with all national sport organizations, you have provincial authorities, and then you have the federal authorities. Several of them don't match the federal. If you don't mind, I saw that 4 or 5 provinces have one, direction. 3 or 4 other provinces go another direction. So that seems to be an area of concern when you have a national sport organization like gymnastics. You have those that have veered off in other directions, and at the end of the day, you have several opinions, if they're right or wrong, compared to the national sport organization. But You want to comment on that? Because I think at that level, when you're getting into a sport, and everybody wants to reach the Olympics, you do see some varying differences between provincial and the national body.
Oh, you're very correct, sir, that there is considerable differences between the different levels. And specifically talking about gymnastics, which is what we reviewed, there's the club level and then the provincial and territorial level and the national level. And the different levels don't particularly get along with each other. The provincial levels challenge the national organization frequently, and there's not a good rapport there. And the provincial levels also have difficulties with the grassroots clubs that are the foundation, really, of gymnastics. And that problem is common across most sports in Canada. The national federations only have a limited jurisdiction, and they have to get the cooperation of the provincial or territorial organizations. And those organizations need to get the grassroots group to cooperate as well. And unfortunately, in gymnastics, that system does not work in a well-integrated fashion. So there is a considerable friction between the different levels of the sport.
Throughout the years, the framework, the safe sport policies, they're good, but we need more people to speak up when they see stuff that shouldn't be happening in the sport, whether it's gymnastics or other sports for girls and women in Canada. We got to thank Kim Shore, and I see she sent you in your report, at least at the end, she did send you, because Gymnastics for Change. We know what has been going on for a number of years. It can't continue. And it is these people that have competed, have seen stuff, that need to be the voice of those coming into the sport. And thank God we have the Kim Shores of the world coming forward with her story and others. Can you just talk about that? Because I just listened to Mr. Moss. I don't think he's listening to those that pay his paycheck, if you don't mind me saying, the grassroots. I was very disturbed. I don't know if you heard him, but he was on the previous panel. There's major issues with gymnastics, and I would say it would start with the executive director, but I just want to say thank you for doing the interviews, because it is those people that need to be heard in this investigation.
Well, we did not conduct an investigation. What we were trying to do is understand what the community felt was needed. A cultural review, was it required? And if it was, how should it be done? And what should be a part of it? So we were trying to build the foundation for a review that would be conducted by an independent group of people subsequent to the release of our work.
Awesome.
And they would have a head start from the information that was available.
Thanks, Mr. McLaren. Mr. McLaren, I've got to switch it over now. Anita Vandenbelt, you have 4 minutes. Go ahead, Anita.
Yes, thank you very, very much. I would like to start with Professor McLaren. In your recent report on gymnastics, you made a number of recommendations. One of them was that there needs to be better monitoring of national sports organizations. I just wonder how best that would be done. I know that there's a move right now to build in clauses in contribution agreements that would have these kinds of requirements, but I'd be interested in your views on that. And then the other recommendation that you made was that there be more supports for athletes. I think all of us here are very concerned about what happens to an athlete when they are harmed, and what kinds of supports that they do or don't have. If you could elaborate on that a little bit as well. And then I do have another question after that for the other witnesses. So if you could do that in a very short time. Thank you.
Okay, I will try and be short. As to the monitoring, accountability of any sport is a problem, and gymnastics has a problem that many other sports have. And there needs to be some oversight, and most sports are trying to tackle that problem by establishing some form of an integrity unit that has an ability to be independent and check that the sport is doing everything that it's supposed to be doing according to its constitution. That's the monitoring point. Being more supportive of athletes, that's certainly required, particularly in gymnastics. You're talking about very young children that start at the club level in that sport. And education, I think, is probably the most important part of trying to get that support. Education that doesn't go just to the children, but goes also to parents and coaches and others involved, such as trainers and physios and so forth. And I'm sorry, I missed your third point, or you didn't give me your third point. You were going to raise it, I think.
Yes, I think you've covered both of my points. I would like to ask the same question to Ms. Gagnon about the supports. We heard earlier today from the Sport Integrity Commissioner that there is a helpline, and if athletes call that line, they can get referred to legal aid. And I know that your organization is providing that support. I wonder if you said also that more needs to be done. I wonder if you could tell us how likely is it that a young athlete who does need legal assistance is able to access that assistance, and how do we make that more prevalent?
So usually the resource that is the best suited to be on the front line to assist athletes or victims are psychosocial organizations. So I would recommend that that these psychosocial resources be made aware of the availability of legal support, that they be trained to explain what kind of legal support is offered, and that they also be trained to make to put the parties in touch, so the victim and the legal information support. And for the legal information support to be effective, in our experience, we need much more than legal information or a one-time conversation. We would really recommend that a lawyer be assigned to the case or to the file of the specific victim, that they read the documents, that they draft documents should documents need to be drafted, and that really there be a counsel and client relationship that is established in order to make sure that there is trust and that the legal advice is relevant to the situation at hand.
Thanks so much. We're now going to pass it over to Adrienne LaRoche. Adrienne, 4 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I'll be quick because my time is short. I'll start with Ms. Gagnon. You said that you don't have the expertise in sports, but you are aware of other fields where there are similar abuses. And you've heard that athletes no longer trust the system. They've come to us and asked us to fight for a change in culture. The system that was implemented by the federal government after Hockey Canada is not working. The Commissioner of Complaints stated that 2/3 of complaints are deemed not receivable. You have this expertise. You worked with Building Trust, tabled by the Committee of Experts on victims of domestic violence and other violence. Do you agree that partisanship should be set aside and create an independent inquiry as asked for by victims in order to help rebuild their trust? Answer. In Quebec, they went outside of the usual legal box. Usually, we see who is the aggressor and who is the victim, but that's not sufficient. There needs to be reparations. And we also need to avoid future cases. And so it requires a culture change, changing training, reviewing values. Regardless of the form that it needs to take by elected officials, there needs to be a culture change and have a more in-depth analysis of the laws. Thank you, Ms. Gagnon. I will now move on to Mr. McLaren. At page 44 of your report, you mentioned 3 models, 3 ways of organizing an office for complaints. You spoke about having a universal code of conduct to prevent and address maltreatment in sport. And I quote, you said that the downside is that it could become another patch on the sports system that is already lacking here in Canada. Could you tell us more on that quote, please?
I think the idea that I was trying to get at was that is establishing the universal code of conduct is very important as a first step, but then the sport at all levels, right down to the grassroots level, if it's going to be effective as a national harmonized system, need to be involved in it. And when you come to a sport like gymnastics, where there's considerable difference of opinions between the grassroots level and the provincial level and the provincial and territorial level, and then the national level, that doesn't work. And that's what I meant by it's just a patch on the system, unless you can change the culture, as Sophie was just talking about, and get a much better functioning hierarchy of administration of rules and regulations and practices from the grassroots right up to the national federation level. That's
Perfect.
a major cultural change.
Thank you so much. We're now going to turn it over to Benita. Benita, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to thank Ms. Gall and also Ms. Gagnon today for really shining a light and even talking about shining a light to really expose some of the things that really need to change in sport. And I also want to recognize the power imbalance, and that's why it's so important that this committee be here having this discussion, because we need to correct that power imbalance, especially for the youngest kids and a lot of them disproportionately girls. So my question initially is for Mr. McLaren, which is around sharing with us how much the gymnasts want their sport and that they want it to be safe. We heard earlier from Mr. Moss that there is up to a number of complaints every week, but that they're properly addressed. You mentioned in your opening statements that your organization explored policies in the work you did, and I wonder if you could explain the process of how gymnasts are protected, how these young people are protected from abuse for Gymnastics Canada.
Yeah, it's a very quick overview because it's a very detailed issue. But as Mr. Moss was referring to, there's a code of conduct, and then there is a safe sport practices. And I think from listening to him, there's no necessary interconnection of those. Well, I think there should be. And the safe sport policies that we reviewed, unfortunately, the sport changed their policies to harmonize more with the UCCMS within a few weeks of our report. So our analysis of all of that is based on a prior version of the sports codes, and we need to do a piece of supplementary work and review how they changed and how much it actually encompassed what we recommended versus, or is it complete? Should it have more done?
Okay, thank you. So I guess I'll ask that of the committee that, Mr. Moss said that the complaints are properly addressed. If we could get a thorough explanation of their process and how they're being addressed, because I think this is something that Madame Gagnon spoke about, which is like who's applying the sanctions, who's applying the follow-up. So I have one more question for Mr. McLaren, and then I will ask Madame Gagnon that. But Mr. McLaren, there is some concern, definitely, from where I'm sitting in this chair, is that, is there potentially a conflict of interest between where some of these sports organizations are getting their funding, if it's federal or Sports Canada, and protection of athletes? I'm thinking about little girls. So do you have any thoughts about what's potentially a conflict of interest in how we get funding and what's being prioritized when gymnasts arrive on the mat or in their clubs?
I don't think there's a conflict of interest. What the problem is accountability. monies are provided, then how are they used, and are they used effectively, and who's examining the use? That's the accountability of the funds. If they're directed at protecting young athletes, how is that done, and who's checking to see that it has been done and where it needs to be improved or changed if it hasn't been done?
Hearing we need so much independence. I wanted to talk to Madame Gall, but I'm not going to have an opportunity, I don't think, but I would like to go to Madame Gagnon just around this accountability and how this power imbalance, how can there be application of consequences for any of these actions? I mean, I think that's where it becomes very, very difficult.
It's extremely complicated. The best situations we've seen, so we have an expertise in the artistic environment, so in the arts. And the best examples we've seen is where there is really authentic and strong leadership from the top of the organization to really ensure that there is change. And unfortunately, sometimes these situations, we see them more when there has been a change in leadership, because the person who apply the sanctions and who are responsible for organizational change aren't personally tied up with the situations that did lead to the complaint. It's extremely difficult to see such a change in culture without a change of leadership.
Perfect.
But there's no easy answer to your question.
Thanks so much. We're now going on to our next round, so it's going to be 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 1 minute, 1 minute. So Anna, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to direct my question to Professor McLaren or Sophie, whichever one of you want to answer it. So I'm not sure what you heard about the testimony from Mr. Moss, and the allegations could not be proven. I don't know how many times you have to be told different stories from different athletes to take action, and it doesn't, I don't know who he's protecting, to be honest with you. I think he's protecting himself. But what I want to know is, how do we protect children? You talked about accountability. What mechanisms can we put into place to ensure that this behavior does not continue? Do we have to insert cameras in gymnasiums? Do we have to insert cameras to ensure that we protect the situation that's going on? Because obviously these young adults, young children, are coming with their problems, and we are doing nothing about it.
I can maybe offer some thoughts quickly. So first of all, I myself am a lawyer, and I believe many people wrongly use principles of criminal law to discuss sexual violence in the workplace or in the day-to-day life. For example, presumption of innocence and so on are not relevant outside the criminal courtroom. So that's one. Second, if we want to implement change, the first step for an organization is to clearly define what type of behaviors they wish to see and what type of behaviors they do not want to see anymore. And organizations have full control over these definitions. They can use as inspiration what the law says, but they can be much bolder, more courageous than what the law says. So defining the standards, and second, training the people inside the organization to understand these standards and behave by them. And third, to make sure that there is a mechanism in place to file complaints when these standards are not met, to make investigations, and then to have sanctions.
Okay, so we've talked about educating the coaches, we've talked about, addressing these issues, but obviously it's still failing. So how do we, basically, I guess the impression I got, which is very disappointing from Mr. Moss, is the fact that, if it was his child, maybe he'd take it more seriously. But we need to stop it. We need to stop it now. We can't wait another year or 2 years or 3 years, because it's impacting these young adults, young children, and it's going to carry on with them. It's going to create mental health issues. How do we stop it? Do we put cameras? Are we allowed? I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm a lawyer. But is that a mechanism that we need to do to protect the innocent
point of order,
victims?
Madam Chair. Can we just refrain from personal attacks like the person's children? I find that really offensive, personally.
Very fair, very fair. So recognize, yeah, very fair, Mark. So just when speaking, let's just be. I'm just going to remind it's time for the answer to this one. You only have about 15 seconds to respond. So who was that question to?
If I could have Professor McLaren, please.
Mr. McLaren for about 15 seconds.
I think to protect them immediately is very difficult because you have to change roles, behaviors, and that requires clear rules, as Sophie was speaking about. It requires education of the people involved, and then aggressive, appropriate administrative action on the part of the sport. And that all is going to take time. You can't just instantaneously protect children, but those are the steps that need to be done.
Thank you so much. We're now going to move over to Marc Sauret for 3 minutes. Marc, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. My first question is for Dr. McLaren. With your study, and you were also instrumental in the implementation of OSIC with the recommendations that you made. We're talking about 4,000 athletes. So if ever there were a national inquiry, there are about 4,000 athletes, and there are thousands of other athletes at the local and provincial level. So if there is to be an inquiry, and it will take years to do so, what recommendations do you have today in order to increase the powers for OSIC so that we can help national organizations and also solve the issues that we have with provincial and local organizations? Do you have any specific recommendations in order to reinforce the powers of OSIC today?
I do, and that would be to require the provincial and territorial organizations to implement all of the policies and procedures in the Universal Code that the National Federation has, and then that the provincial and territorial organizations require that those at the grassroots have the same rules and regulations, so you have a harmonious system throughout. I know there are a lot of legal problems with doing so, but that's the answer, I think, to improving the system and making it effective. Right now, it doesn't go down to the grassroots.
Alors, est-ce que, OK, si on regarde au niveau...
And so, if we look at the Universal Code of Conduct now, how can the federal government reinforce the importance of this with local and provincial organizations? And thank you for those 46 recommendations. I think you might have already sent them to the committee, and if not, if you could send them. But what could we do in order to better support local and provincial organizations?
I think moves need to be made by the national federations to be cooperative, and provincial and territorial organizations need to be more accepting of the role of the national federations. How can the federal government do that? I think only by encouraging greater cooperation and discussion, since they really don't have the legislative authority to push it down to the provinces and further down to the grassroots.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We're going to go for 1 minute to Adrian. Adrian?
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be quick. Thank you, Ms. Gagnon, for contributing your expertise to our study. Mr. McLaren, you have written many reports for sports organizations because of their inaction in the case of complaints. How much were you paid for those reports, and can you share that with the clerk?
Which reports are you speaking about? If it's Gymnastics Canada, yes, I can. What other ones are you thinking of? I've done a great number.
Je nommais notamment
Gymnastics Canada and Soccer Canada specifically.
Okay, I'd have to check on the Soccer Canada. Soccer Canada was a different type of review than Gymnastics Canada. I can tell you what the Gymnastics Canada fees are right off the top of my head, and it was $200,000.
Thank you so much.
And
And if you can get that additional information, Mr. McLaren, and send it our way, that'd be fantastic on that secondary. Thank you so much. We're now going to go to the final round of questions. 1 minute to Benita.
Thank you so much. My question is for Ms. Gall, and we've heard today about need for culture change, and certainly we know there's embedded patriarchal norms. We have it here in government as well. I know you've done a lot of work on hockey in your filmmaking and your storytelling, and I was just wondering if you would be able to share with us some of what you saw of distinct differences and attributes in two different gender-based hockey or cultures, and if there is some positive that you could share with us of one where one could take up the other.
Well, what's positive of the fact this conversation's happening at all? Because in 2015, when I was trying to make a document, I made a documentary about women in sport, and I was trying to tell stories about athlete safety and issues of sexual abuse, and I couldn't find anyone who was willing to talk to me about these issues when Corn Miller sort of explained her experience with Water Polo Canada. But hearing from people whose experiences, sort of like the stories we've heard today, I wasn't able to find those. So it's amazing that these stories are told. In terms of hockey, I don't know if I'll have time, but I would just like to say that if you're going to talk about changing culture, we have to understand that culture is made up of discourses and how athletes are represented and how young people in particular see athletes, female athletes in a highly sexualized manner. There's impacts to issues around athlete safety for that. So it would be great if young girl hockey players could see themselves having a career in hockey one day. That would be fabulous.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd really like to thank Donna Gall, Sophie Gagnon, and Richard McLaren. Thank you so much for coming to our committee and providing your testimony. We are going to be suspending and then going in camera. So I'm going to ask everybody who is not a member of staff or from the whip's office, we will need to clear the room so we can immediately go in. So I will suspend for about 30 seconds to 40 seconds, because really, Dawn, it's just a few of you. It's going to be a little longer because we've got to switch over. But we're just going to ask everybody from the public to leave the room. So we'll suspend for a minute here.
you.